Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Today we will be starting what's called Third Ezra and Second Esdras. I know the titles right here are a little off, so it seems confusing to me. But he made two PDFs. This one isn't even available anymore um, by its own website. It was on the same link as the fourth Ezra one, so it was a little confusing. But the chronology here takes place from Yoash Yahu and then onward to the captivity and then the restoration. It kind of goes over that quickly and then focuses more on their return and the information regarding that. We'll see fairly quickly. But right here in the first part, I'd like to mention that when it talks about the remnant of Yisra'el that was keeping the feast of the land here with Yoash Yahu, and there is no Passover like it anywhere except for like the feast they kept during the reign of Shlomo. That was during the 28 years where the northern tribes, the northern reign, had conquered, defeated the Assyrian Empire, and ruled over most of Asia, or what we call the Middle East at that time. They only did it for, like I said, 28 years, and then they left back up to what we call Ukraine. But that's historical, that's a known fact. And in Scripture, it never calls them the Scythians. It only calls them the remnant of the house of Yisrael that was there in the land. And they were really spread throughout the Middle East at the time. But in secular history, they call them the Scythians or the Scythians. And when they had occupied the area, they actually named a city, they changed the name to Scythiopolis or Scythiopolis, and you can read that in Josephus and other places. That was when they had migrated and stayed there for a while. But without further ado, this is Second Esdras, also known as Third Ezra. Chapter 1. And Yoshiyahu held the feast of the Passover in Jerusalem to Yahuwah his Almighty, and offered the Passover the 14th Yom of the first month, having set the Kohanim according to their Yomim courses, being arrayed in long garments in the great tabernacle of Yahuwah. And he spoke to the Leviim, or Levites, the Kodesh ministers of Yisra'el, that they should set apart themselves to Yahuwah, to set the set-apart ark of Yahuwah in the house that Shlomo, or sovereign Shlomo, the son of Dawid, had built, and said, You shall no more bear the ark upon your shoulders. Now therefore serve Yahuwah your Elohim, and minister to his people Yisrael, and prepare you after your families and kindreds, according as Dawid the sovereign of Yisrael prescribed, and according to the magnificence of Shlomo his son, and standing in the tabernacle according to the several dignity of the families of you the Leviim, who minister in the presence of your brethren, the children of Yisrael. Offer the Passover in order, and make ready the offerings or sacrifices for your brethren, and keep the Passover according to the commandment of Yahuwah, which was given to Moshe. And to the people that was found there, Yoshiyahu gave 30,000 lambs and kids, and 3,000 calves. These things were given to the sovereign's allowance, or of the sovereign's allowance, according as he promised, to the people, to the Kohanim, and to the Leviim. And Hilkiah, Zechariah, and Silas, the governors of the tabernacle, gave to the Kohanim for the Passover 2,600 sheep and 300 calves. and Yokenyahu, and Samayyah, and Nathaniel his brother, and Asabiah, and Ochiel, and Joram, captains over thousands, gave to the Luiim for the Passover 5,000 sheep and 700 calves. And when these things were done, the Kohanim and the Luiim, having the unleavened bread, stood in a very comely order according to the kindreds. And according to the several dignities of the fathers before the people, to offer to Yahuwah as it is written in the book of Moshe, and thus did they in the dawn. And they roasted the Passover with fire, as appertains. As for the sacrifices, they sawed them in brass pots and pans with a tob savor, or pleasant savor, and set them before all the people. And afterward they prepared for themselves and for the Kohanim their brethren, the sons of Aharon. For the Kohanim offered the fat until night, and the Luiim prepared for themselves and the Kohanim their brethren, the sons of Aaron. The Kodesh singers also, the sons of Asaph, were in their order, according to the appointment of Dawid, to wit, Asaph, Zechariah, and Yaduthan, who was of the sovereign's retinue. Moreover, the porters were at every gate. It was not lawful for any to go from his ordinary service, for their brethren the Luiim prepared for them. Thus were the things that belonged to the sacrifices of Yahuwah accomplished in that Yom, that they might hold the Passover, and offer sacrifices upon the altar of Yahuwah, according to the commandment of sovereign Yoash Yahu. So the children of Yisra'el, which were present, held the Passover at that time, and the feast of unleavened bread, 7 Yamim. And such a Passover was not kept in Yisra'el since the time of the foreteller Shamuel. Yes, all the sovereigns of Yisrael held not such a Pesach as Yoash Yahu, and the Kohanim, and the Luiim, and the Yahudim held with all Yisrael that were found dwelling at Jerusalem. And in the 18th year of the reign of Yoash Yahu was this Passover kept. And the works of Yoash Yahu were upright before Yahuwah his Elohim, with a chesed, or lovingly kind heart. As for the things that came to pass in his time, they were written in former times concerning those that sinned, and did wickedly against Yahuwah above all people and reigns, and how they grieved him exceedingly, so that the word of Yahuwah rose up against Yisrael. And if you want an idea of what he means, the man of Elohim that came to Jeroboam when he instituted the altar and the golden calves, he foretold that Yoash Yahu would raise up and burn the bones of these false foretellers on this altar, and a sign was that the altar would be broken. And then when Jeroboam stretched his hand out to tell him to be taken, the altar broke and his hand was withered. So the sign was accomplished, and then he asked for healing. The man of Elohim prayed for him, but when he had invited him to return and eat with him, he refused, saying he could not. He was told not to eat or drink in this place, and to do not return in the way that you came. All signs of what he was supposed to do went amongst the wayward children of the northern reign. He kept that true with the sovereign, but on his way home, a false foreteller rose up and convinced him to come back, saying that he had heard from the word of Yahuwah, saying to invite him to his place. And so, listening to the man over the word that he had received, he was punished for such. And then the contrivance of that man was that he wanted to be buried with that foreteller because he said what he said would certainly come to pass. And when Yoash Yahu was burning the bones of all these individuals, he didn't touch the bones of that man or the foreteller because of that. You find that out specifically and the intentions of it in Josephus, where he says that plainly. But otherwise, you can infer it through reading the account in Scripture. To continue, verse 25, it says, Now, after all these acts of Yoash Yahu, it came to pass that Pharaoh, the sovereign of Mitzrayim, came to raise war at Carchemish upon Euphrates, and Yoash Yahu went out against him. But the sovereign of the sovereign of Mitzrayim, which his name was Necho, if you remember, and Nekah means to strike, just so you know. He was used by our Creator to strike at this individual. But the sovereign of Mitzrayim sent to him, saying, What have I to do with you, O sovereign of Yahudah? I am not sent out from Yahuwah against you, for my war is upon Euphrates. And now Yahuwah is with me. Yes, Yahuwah is with me, hastening me forward. Depart from me, and be not against Yahuwah. So right here, even if this man was lying and Yahuwah had not sent him, he had made clear his intentions was not to harm or to fight against the sovereign of Yahudah. So he had no ill intentions toward him, and there was no harm. He wasn't even asking to buy any of his food or water for cost. He just wanted to travel on his way. And contrary to that, Yoash Yahu was picking a fight, which is why he couldn't stand. On top of the fact that the gentleman directly said that he was sent from Yahuwah, and it was not heeded. So howbeit, Yoash Yahu did not turn back his chariot from him, but undertook to fight with him, not regarding the words of the foreteller Yirmiyahu, spoken by the mouth of Yahuwah. And that would be where he said he was going to raise up the sovereign of Mitzrayim to fight against him. I don't have the direct quote off the top of my head. Verse 29, he says, But joined battle with him in the plain of Megiddo. The valley of Megiddo is where quite a few battles have happened, and everyone's familiar with Armageddon, or what they call Har Megiddo, which is the mountain of Megiddo, which people use as a euphemism for the last great battle. It's interesting when you look at what that word actually means. They don't tell you in the etymology what Megiddo comes from directly, so it's rather interesting. But they'll say it comes from a different word, and then if you look at the Megiddo, it's literally the place of his preaching, or the place of his speech or discourse. So it's the hill of the one speaking. And that's who's going to be the three unclean ruach, or spirits like frogs, they call it, leading all to the one who's speaking. I don't have all the answers for that, but the one thing that came to mind was it's where we're at in foretelling right now, which is why it's kind of dark. We're looking through a mirror dimly at these things. And it's always at the times that you're living in that's the least clear in what's going to happen. But the three unclean ruach oath like frogs, bringing all the sovereigns in all the world to battle of that great day, or that great Yom. And the meaning of Har Megiddo, or the mountain of Megiddo there, is rather interesting. It reminds me of the ecumenical movement, the bringing everyone back to Rome using all these means that they're doing through the media and the various means that they are. So it says, But joined battle with him in the plain of Megiddo, and the princes came against sovereign Yoash Yahu. Then said the sovereign to his servants, carry me away out of the battle, for I am very weak. And immediately his servants took him away out of the battle. Then got he up on his second chariot, and being brought back to Jerusalem, died, and was buried in his father's sepulchre. And in all Yahudah they mourned for Joash Yah. Yes, Yirmiyahu the foreteller lamented for Joash Yah. And the chief men with the women made lamentation for him to this Yom. And this was given out for an ordinance to be done continually in all the nation of Yisra'el. And this is reminiscent of the remembrance of the martyrs that happened during the time of the belief. It turned into something that was praying to martyrs is not something that should be done. But the commemorations that they had was an established thing that they did. Um, that's a fact. It isn't so much practiced by believers anymore, however, because of the corruption that came about, I think. But something of that nature was established even by our Creator in the land, and it can be seen in what's called the recognitions of Clement. There was a few martyrs that had happened at the time where Shaul was persecuting the assembly, and he had the letters to go out to Damascus. The background in the recognitions of Clement was that the believers that left the persecution, they went to the sepulchres of some martyrs, that every year their sepulchres were made white and clean of their own volition, supernaturally, by the providence of Yahuwah, we call it. And that in a great part stemmed the rage against the believers, because they saw that it was from above that it was maintained. So it says, these things are written in the book of the stories of the sovereigns of Yahudah, and every one of the acts that Joash Yahu did, and his splendor, and his comprehension in the Torah of Yahuwah, and the things that he had before, or he had done before. And the things that he had done before, and the things now recited, are reported in the book of the sovereigns of Yisra'el and Yahudah. And the people took Yahu Achaz, the son of Joash Yahu, and made him sovereign instead of Joash Yahu his father, when he was 23 years old. And he reigned in Yahudah in Jerusalem 3 months. And then the sovereign of Mitzrayim disposed him from reigning in Jerusalem. And he set a tax upon the land of 100 talents of silver and 1 talent of gold. The sovereign of Mitzrayim also made sovereign Yahuakim his brother, sovereign of Yahudah and Jerusalem. And he bound Yahuakim and the nobles, but Zaraxes his brother he apprehended and brought him out of Mitzrayim. 25 years old was Yahuakim when he was made sovereign in the land of Yahudah and Jerusalem, and he did evil before Yahuwah. Wherefore, against him Nebuchadnezzar, the sovereign of Babylon, came up and bound him with a chain of brass and carried him into Babylon. Nebuchadnezzar also took of the set-apart vessels of Yahuwah and carried them away and set them in his own temple at Babylon. But those things that are recorded of him and of his uncleanness and impiety are written in the chronicles of the sovereigns. And Yahuachim, his son, reigned in his stead. He was made sovereign being 18 years old, and reigned but 3 months and 10 yamim in Jerusalem, and did evil before Yahuwah. So after a year, Nebuchadnezzar sent and caused him to be brought into Babylon with the Kodesh vessels of Yahuwah, and made Zedekiyahu sovereign of Yahudah and Jerusalem. when he was 21 years old, and he reigned 11 years. And he did evil also in the sight of Yahuwah, and cared not for the words that were spoken to him by the foreteller Yirmiyahu from the mouth of Yahuwah. And after that, sovereign Nebuchadnezzar made him swear by the name of Yahuwah. He forswore himself and rebelled, and hardening his neck, his heart, he transgressed the Torah of Yahuwah of Yisra'el. And that's the key. He made an oath that he swore, and then he broke it. So there was no way he would be able to stand, regardless of what he did. The governors also of the people and of the Kohanim did many things against the Torah, and passed all the pollutions of all nations, and defiled the great tabernacle of Yahuwah, which was set apart in Jerusalem. Before we continue, I just want to point out something that has come up on a few occasions. When our Creator says He's going to do something, He does not change His mind or take it back. So with the abominations and the idolatry that was set up by Manasseh, the sovereign after Hezkiel, who, if you remember, when he was sick, he petitioned our Creator and cried, and he was given 15 years longer to live or to exist. And again, when Jerusalem was surrounded by the Assyrians, and they'd already taken the strong cities of Yahudah from their disobedience, he prayed and petitioned Yahuwah, and his prayers were heard, and a 185,000 man army from the Assyrians was wiped out by the providence of our Maker. So it was his son that set up these idols, did abominable things, and if you read the ascension of Yeshayahu, it was he who was responsible for the martyrdom of Yeshayahu, who was sawn asunder, as mentioned in the book of Hebrews. But it was because of the things that he did that Yahuwah said that he would destroy Jerusalem. He would destroy the Hikkel, and it was going to be wiped out. But because of the repentance and obedience of the people, it was stayed. And then while they did the right thing, he did not put his wrath on them. But as you can see here, the people were doing evil and many things against the Torah, as well as the Kohanim. And just like he had said to Shemuel, when the people were going to do evil, both they and their sovereigns would be consumed. That's exactly what we see here. So continuing with verse 49, it says, the governors also of the people and of the Kohanim did many things against the Torah, and passed all the pollutions of all nations, and defiled the great tabernacle of Yahuwah, which was set apart in Jerusalem. Nevertheless, Yahuwah of their fathers sent by his messenger to call them back, because he spared them and his tabernacle also. But they had his messengers in derision. And look, when Yahuwah spoke to them, they made a sport of his foretellers, so far forth that he, being wroth with his people for their great wickedness, commanded the sovereigns of the Kasdim, which, just to recap, this word Chaldean is put in place by the scribes because Rome hates the Chaldeans or the Caledonians, which were the original name for the inhabitants of what we call Scotland. It was a branch of a remnant of the 12 tribes that are more noble, if you want to call that, of any other people I can know of the face of the earth. When everyone went into apostasy, they stayed true to the words trustworthily given to their patriarchs, Abraham, Yitzhak, and Jacob. They called them the laws of the altar, and this little remnant stayed true almost without fail to our Creator for over 1,000 years, and they suffered no problems. Every affliction they were in, they were delivered from. Every problem that arose from whatever sins they were committing, because they were true to our Maker and loved Him, it was corrected and then worked through. And they went through a great many years in shalom. It wasn't until the advent of our Mashiach that they started to stumble and had a corresponding problems. But that can be found in what's called the ancient history of Caledonia. And it's because they were such a thorn in the side of Rome, even after they became believers in our Mashiach. They were one of the two witnesses is known in history as the Waldensians. The Waldensians were cousins of the Caledonians, the Celtic peoples that stayed in Europe, while this remnant that stayed true to our Maker kept separating themselves and going where no one else had corrupted the area. But the original name here is the Kasdim, as we mentioned before, and that means to be like demons. So when his people were evil, he sends those that are like demons after them. And that's the ones that are involved in witchcraft, who have the unclean ruach oath, or spirits influencing them, possessing them, and manifesting in how they act. So it said, so far forth that he, being wroth with his people for their great wickedness, commanded the sovereigns of the Kasdim to come up against them, who slew their young men with the sword, yes, even within the compass of their set-apart tabernacle, and spared neither young man nor maid, old man nor child among them, for he delivered all into their hands. And one more time, just to reiterate, we reap what we sow. When we act contrary to the truth, and we're doing this with our eternal well-being by how we behave, this happens to us to show us, in a physical sense, the same things, so that we can turn from those ways and exist. Continuing on verse 54. And they took all the Kodesh vessels of Yahuwah, both great and small, with the vessels of the ark of Yahuwah and the sovereign's treasures, and carried them away into Babylon. As for the house of Yahuwah, they burnt it, and broke down the walls of Jerusalem, and set fire upon her towers, which is what we already read in Baruch, if you recall, where he gives a more full account. It wasn't the Babylonians that actually broke down the wall, and they didn't get the ark or the most kadosh things. Those were hidden, but the vessels were taken into Babylon. And if you remember, during those videos, we had mentioned that the vessels in the set-apart place were a representation of the vessels, or the men who separate themselves from the things that Shaul mentions in his epistle, and become those vessels of value in the house. So it's the same picture. All right, continuing. Verse 56, and it says, and as for her splendid things, they never ceased till they had consumed and brought them all to naught. And the people that were not slain with the sword he carried to Babylon, which Babel means confusion, who became servants to him and his children till the Persians reigned, to fulfill the word of Yahuwah spoken by the mouth of Yirmiyahu. I'm not certain how familiar you are, but in the recognitions of Clement, it specifically mentions that the Persians, this people, came about from both Mitzrayim, the son of Cush, when he had been involved in magic, witchcraft. He was a wizard, whatever you want to call that. And they had invaded the Middle East, and they were in this area. It was also contemporary from shortly before Nimrod founded Babel, and started the building of the tower.
He got really really quiet, and then the dogs started barking. I went to go see what they were barking at. When I came back,
All right, just to back up, sorry if I got lost there. Um, Mitzrayim, the son of Ham, was known to the Greeks as Zoroaster. And if anyone's familiar with Zoroasterism, there's a whole pagan religion. He founded. It, it was because of him. It talks about that a little bit in the recognitions of Clement. Specifically, because the adversary could not get men to turn away from Yahuwah to worship idols overtly, he used magic or miraculous things through what we'd call wizards and magicians to incite men to errant belief. And Zoroaster or Mitzrayim used to call down lightning from the stars until he angered the demon that he was using, and it struck him dead. But they used that. They made a sepulcher for him, said he was living lightning, which is what Zoroaster means in the Greek. And from there, they started to set up statues and worship him. He brought his ashes, Nimrod brought his ashes to the Persians, which were his people in the area, and taught how to worship fire, where they had the fire worship they set up there that eventually became known as Mithraism, which carried over into Rome as the Sol Invictus worship or the unconquerable sun thing. Um, but he is said to be the founder of the Persians, Mitzrayim, as well as Eleazar, the servant of Abraham, who was adopted by him and would have been his inheritor had he not had his son. So those both of that information is given in the recognitions of Clement by Kepha. But to continue here, we're on verse 58. It says, "Until the land had enjoyed her Sabbaths, the whole time of her desolation shall she rest, until the full term of 70 years. In the first year of Cyrus," I'm sorry, before we move on, um, the punishment because they did not keep the Shabbat in the land was when they were vomited out of it. They were going to be outside of the land until the land could keep the Shabbat, the Sabbaths that they didn't when they should have. And that was the exact time that they were left in captivity away from it while it was desolate. In that same way, during the millennial reign, if you add up the time using our Creator's calendar, after 6,000 years, there's exactly 1,000 years of Sabbaths that the world has not kept. And so while the world is resting, they're keeping the Sabbath that was not kept otherwise. And I thought that was a pretty amazing, not a coincidence because I don't believe in those, but it's pretty amazing confirmation. There we go. Thank you. All right, so continuing, this is chapter 2. And this is getting back on now that they went into the captivity. It's going to be bringing them back into the story for where they're at, going back into the land, which is the focus. It says, "In the first year of Cyrus, the sovereign of the Persians, that the word of Yahuwah might be accomplished, that he had promised by the mouth of Yirmiyahu, Yahuwah raised up the Ruach of Cyrus the sovereign of the Persians. And he made proclamation through all his reign, and also by writing, saying, Thus says Cyrus, sovereign, or Koresh, as it says in the Hebrew, sovereign of the Persians, Yahuwah of Yisra'el, the Most High Yahuwah has made me sovereign of the whole world, and commanded me to build him a house at Jerusalem in Yahudah. If therefore there be any of you that are his people, let Yahuwah, even his Elohim, be with him, and let him go up to Jerusalem that is in Yahudah, and build the house of Yahuwah of Yisrael. For he is Yahuwah that dwells in Jerusalem." So he's saying, and for he is he who is, or he who exists, that dwells in Jerusalem. Whosoever then dwell in the places about, let them help him, those I say that are his neighbors, with gold and with silver, with gifts, with horses, and with cattle, and other things, which have been set forth by vow for the great tabernacle of Yahuwah at Jerusalem. Then the chief of the families of Yehuda and of the tribe of Benjamin stood up, the Kohanim also, and the Leviim, and all those whose mind Yahuwah had moved to go up and to build a house for Yahuwah at Jerusalem. And they dwelt round about them, and helped them in all things with silver and gold. Sorry. And they that dwelt round about them, and helped them in all things with silver and gold, with horses and cattle, and with very many free gifts of a great number whose minds were stirred up to that. Sovereign Cyrus or Koresh also brought forth the set apart vessels which Nebuchadnezzar had carried away from Jerusalem, and had set up in his temple of idols. Now when Cyrus the sovereign of the Persians had brought them forth, he delivered them to Mithridates, his treasurer, and by him they were delivered to Sanabassar, the sovereign of Yehuda. That Mithridates, that's a name of some of the leaders of the Parthian Empire, which were of the line of Dawid when they were in power. They had some of them named Mithridates, some of them named Pharez or Perez after Peretz as well, quite often. But if you recall, it was it's in the book of Esther, where she was of the royalty of Yehuda, and she married into the Persian line. So it was a son of Yehuda from the line of Dawid that was ruling over his people in captivity as well. And it's things like that that happened pretty much everywhere that they were spread to. And that is a foretelling that is mentioned specifically in the promises given by our Creator, and very clearly shown in the book of Yobelim or Jubilees, with the promises given to Abraham, Yitzhak, Yaakov, and then to Yehuda and Louis respectively. But also you can see it in the Testament of the 12 patriarchs, where Yehuda is talking he directly mentions some of these things, and that his children would be sovereigns over the nations. But to continue, verse 12, it says, and by him they were delivered to Sanabassar, the governor of Yehuda. And this was the number of them, 1,000 golden cups, and 1,000 of silver, censers of silver, 29, vials of gold, 30, and of silver, 2,410, and 1,000 other vessels. So all the vessels of gold and of silver, which were carried away, were 5,469. These were brought back to Sanabassar, together with them of the captivity from Babylon to Jerusalem. I find that interesting because it was about 5,000 amongst the believers that were delivered that is mentioned during the time of the altercation with Kepha and Shaul, with him going to Damascus. That happened in the recognitions of Clement. It mentions that there was about 5,000 believers at the time. So it's an interesting parallel. It says, but in the time of Arshurus, or Artaxerxes, the sovereign of the Persians, Belamus, and Mithridates, and Taubilus, and Rathamus, and Betethimus, and Semilus, the secretary, with others that were in commission with them, dwelling in Samaria and other places, wrote to him against them that dwelt in Yahuda and Jerusalem these letters following. To King Arshurus, our master, your servants Rathamus the story writer, and Similius the scribe, and the rest of their council, and the judges or the arbitrators that are in Silosyria and Phoenicia, be it known to the master sovereign that the Yahudim that are up from you to us, being come into Jerusalem, that rebellious and wicked city, do build the marketplaces and repair the walls of it, and do lay the foundation of the great tabernacle. I just want to make a slight digression real quick. I apologize, but this terminology right here, the master, the sovereign, that very thing is all throughout the Assyrian now. All right, sorry about that. Just to recap again, this phrase right here where it says, be it known to you, the master sovereign, is something that you can find in the Assyrian tablets that were discovered. There's a book that was written by a gentleman named E. Raymond Capt, and it's called The Missing Link Found in the Assyrian Tablets. And it's all about the historical, the archaeological evidence showing the migration of the northern rain after its dispersion. And in that, he translates a whole bunch of these cuneiform tablets and other writings from the Assyrian Empire that were discovered in Ashurbanipal's palace. And they're like spy reports for the children, where they were placed and what was going on with them. And that term, that be it the sovereign or the master, the sovereign, is repeated all over the place. It's a common way of their greeting their sovereign and how they write. And this is just another confirmation of that, because you can see it even here, where these people who were displaced by the Assyrians into the land still write to their sovereign in that same fashion. So I thought that was a great witness and a confirmation of the historical facts that you can read in that book with the actual writings from the Assyrian spies and the reports they made to their sovereign. So that's an interesting witness. But to continue here, verse 19, it says, now, if this city and the walls thereof be made up again, they will not only refuse to give tribute, but also rebel against sovereigns. And forasmuch as the things pertaining to the tabernacle are now in hand, we think it meet or beneficial not to neglect such a matter, but to speak to our master the sovereign, to the intent that if it be your pleasure, it may be sought out in the books of your fathers. And you shall find in the chronicles of what is written concerning these things, and shall comprehend that that city was rebellious, troubling both sovereigns and cities, and that the Yahudim were rebellious and raised always wars therein, for the which cause even this city was made desolate. Wherefore now do we declare to you, O sovereign, or O master the sovereign, that if this city be built again, and the walls thereof set up anew, you shall from henceforth have no passage into Silosyria and Phoenicia. Then the sovereign wrote back again to Rathamus, the story writer, to Beeltithmus, to Similius, the scribe, and to the rest that were in commission, and dwellers in Samaria and Syria and Phoenicia, after this manner. I have read the epistle which you have sent to me. Therefore I commanded to make diligent search, and it has been found that that city was from the beginning practicing against sovereigns, and the men therein were given to rebellion and war, and that were in Jerusalem, who reigned and exacted tributes in Cilicia and Phoenicia. Now therefore I have commanded to hinder those men from building the city, and heed to be taken that there be no more done in it, and that those wicked workers proceed no further to the annoyance of sovereigns. Then King Ashurius, his letters being read, Rathamus and Similius the scribe and the rest that were in commission with them, removing in haste toward Jerusalem with a troop of horsemen and a multitude of people in battle array, began to hinder the builders. And it's this euphemism here of calling the builders, that's where our Mashiach gets his saying. And the stone, or uh, the stone that the builders rejected, has become the chief cornerstone. The builders specifically that came back and rebuilt the place. Right? It says, and the building of the great tabernacle in Jerusalem ceased until the second year of the reign of Darius, the sovereign of the Persians. Now, I don't want to speculate too much because I don't have the history plain in front of me. I can't lay it out very clearly like I can other sections. But all of these things that happened, all of the ways that it happened, the back and forth with the rebuilding, the starting up and the stopping again, the building of the wall before the city, and everything and the events that take place is a foreshadow. It's a type and picture of the events that would later happen in history with the people. I don't. We've talked about that on many occasions, so I don't want to go back over that. But anyone that's interested can go back to the first videos that we read with the last part of Second Baruch that goes into more detail and gives examples on that. But I just wanted to point that out. The same thing is true here. And all the time that they were doing things in the land was a foreshadow of later history. Just like Abraham and what he walked out, his children later walked out. It's the same picture. Um, One thing that I just recently had come to my comprehension was after the return from Babylon, there was no sovereigns over the children. It was a democracy with a government, with a governor, you could say. It was not set up with a sovereign until later on, where they had what they call king priests or sovereigns that were Kohanim as well. And those ones were reigning over the people. Um, if you look at what happened after the captivity in Babylon with his believers after he came, Mystery Babylon, what you could say the Dark Ages and being imprisoned in captivity in the belly of the beast during the time of the two witnesses are persecuted. After they leave, there wasn't all these popular governments come about, and there's no more sovereigns. Although there is a sovereign over the house of Yisra'el as a fulfilled promise to the seed of Dawid, that he'd always have his seed ruling over them in such a capacity. And that is in England today, in their throne still. But even that is in a limited capacity. They're not sovereign like they could have been after the captivity. But it's the same picture here. And then what we have is these, uh, for lack of, this is the correct terminology, the king priests trying to rule over everyone. So it's the same picture, but one teaches the other, and it's not quite always the same sense because the Maccabees and the ones that were in such a capacity, they were considered righteous. They were accepted before our Maker. Their prayers were heard and answered. So I'm not, and they're actually spoken of as commendable examples to look to in the apostolic constitutions. So I won't speak any evil to anyone that is commended in Scripture, which the Maccabees were, and even some of them that were sovereign, high Kohen, and foretellers in that position. Alexander Janus, they call him, is one of them. I believe he was the last one, actually. But right here, to we'll probably finish with chapter 3. This is an awesome section. And if you keep in mind the virtuous woman, Proverbs 31, if you keep in mind that a husband and wife is supposed to be represented like the Mashiach and his bride or the body, with this parable and the things that are said, he only declares truthful things in it, and it's pretty amazing connections that you can put there. So I'm not going to interrupt while I'm reading it. I'm just going to read straight through now that I've already said that. All right, so chapter 3. It says, Now when Darius reigned, he made a great feast to all his subjects, and to all his household, and to all the princes of Media and Persia, and to all the governors and captains and lieutenants that were under him, from India to Ethiopia, of 127 provinces. This is the same Darius that has his memorial put up in what is called the Beth Hesan stone, and it's that stone that is considered like the Rosetta Stone of the Middle East, where the Rosetta Stone unlocked the Egyptian hieroglyphs for archaeological and historical purposes. The Beth Hesan stone unlocks the Assyrian, the Babylonian, and the Persian, because it was written in those three languages about his conquests. And in that writing, it's on the face of the side of a mountain, we have direct evidence of what the children in captivity were called. One of the tribes, the leader of them, was known as Saka or Sakus, and he was a leader of the Saka or the Yitzhaka, the sons of Yitzhak, and they were called the Scyths or the Scythians, or the Sake and the Scythians are all one, and it was called by the Babylonians on that stone the Qumri, or the house of Omri. So there's that connection. But right here it says, he wrote this, or he made a great feast to all his household and to all his princes, and everyone from India to Ethiopia, 127 provinces. And when they had eaten and drunken, and being satisfied were gone home, then Darius the sovereign went into his bedchamber and slept, and soon after awakened. This part right here is recorded a little different in Josephus. In that one, he mentions that it was Darius and his men that came up and contrived with this idea that whoever spoke would get these rewards. And in here it says that the men came up with it themselves. But when you compare the accounts, the other one makes more sense, because you can't rightly have three guards just go up to the sovereign and say, hey, if we say something you find clever, you're going to give us all these things because we say so. It doesn't really work that way. But the other way, where it was the sovereign coming up with this contrivance, it, it seems like it's a natural course of what would happen at a feast. But it says, Then 3 young men that were of the guard that kept the sovereign's body spoke one to another, Let every one of us speak a sentence, he that shall overcome, and whose sentence shall seem wiser or more prudent than the others, to him the sovereign Darius gave great gifts and great things in token of victory, as to be clothed in purple, to drink in gold, and to sleep in bridles of gold, and a head attire of fine linen, and a chain about his neck. And he shall sit next to Darius because of his chokmah, or wisdom, and shall be called Darius his cousin, or by Darius his cousin. And then everyone wrote his sentence, sealed it, and laid it under the sovereign's Darius his pillow, and said that when the sovereign is arisen, some will give him the writings, and of whose side the sovereign and the 3 princes of Persia shall judge that his sentence is the most prudent. To him shall the victory be given, as was appointed. The first wrote, "Wine is the strongest." The second wrote, "The sovereign is strongest." The third wrote, "Women are strongest, but above all things, truth bears away the victory." Now, when the sovereign was risen up, they took their writings and delivered them to him. And so he read them. And sending forth, he called all the princes of Persia and Media, and the governors and the captains and the lieutenants and the chief officers, and sat him down in the royal seat of arbitration or judgment, and the writings were read before them. And he said, "Call the young men, and they shall declare their own sentences." So they were called and came in. And he said to them, "Declare to us your mind concerning the writings." Then began the first, who had spoken of the strength of wine. And he said thus, "O you men, how exceeding strong is wine! It causes all men to err that drink it. It makes the mind of the sovereign and of the fatherless child to be all one, and of the bondsman and of the free man, of the poor man and of the rich. It also, it turns also every thought into jollity and mirth, so that a man remembers neither sorrow nor debt. And it makes every heart rich, so that a man remembers neither sovereign nor governor. And it makes to speak all things by talents. And when they are in their cups, they forget their love both to friends and brethren, and a little after draw out swords. But sorry about that, verse 23. But when they are from the wine, they remember not what they have done. O you men, is not wine the strongest, that enforces to do thus? And when he had so spoken, he held his shalom. Then the second, that had spoken of the strength of the sovereign, began to say, "You men, do not men excel in strength that bear rule over sea and land and all things in them? But yet the sovereign is more mighty, for he is master of all these things and has dominion over them, and whatsoever he commands them they do. If he bid them make war, the one against the other, they do it. If he send them out against the enemies, they go and break down mountains, walls, and towers. They slay and are slain, and transgress not the sovereign's commandment. If they get the victory, they bring all to the sovereign, as well the spoil as all things else. Likewise, for those that are no soldiers, and have not to do with wars, but use husbandry, when they have reaped again that which they had sown, they bring it to the sovereign, and compel one another to pay tribute to the sovereign. And yet he is but one man. If he command to kill, they kill. If he command to spare, they spare. If he command to smite, they smite. And if he command to make desolate, they make desolate. If he command to build, they build. If he command to cut down, they cut down. And if he command to plant, they plant. So all his people and his armies obey him. Furthermore, he lies down, he eats and drinks, and takes his rest. And these keep watch round about him. Neither may anyone depart and do his own business, neither disobey they him in anything. O you men, how should not the sovereign be mighty, when in such sort he is obeyed? And he held his tongue. So both of these men, and just like Zerubbabel here, they're only speaking what they know to be true and trying to determine what they believe to be the strongest or the greatest thing in creation because of that. But here is Zerubbabel's response to such. Verse 13 says, Then the third, who had spoken of women and of the truth, this was Zerubbabel, began to speak. O you men, it is not the great sovereign, nor the multitude of men, neither is it wine that excels. Who is it then that rules them, or has the mastership over them? Are they not women? Women have borne the sovereign and all the people that bear rule by sea and land. Even of them they came, and it's mentioned specifically in the Chokmah Shalomo, or the Wisdom of Solomon, as it's called, about the birth of a sovereign being of a woman and all of them coming the same way. So that's an interesting witness. It says, Even of them they came, and they nourished them up that planted the vineyards, from where the wine comes. These also make garments for men. These bring splendor to men, and without women cannot men be. Yes, and if men have gathered together gold and silver, or any other goodly thing, or pleasant thing, do they not love a woman which is comely in favor and beauty? And letting all those things go, do they not agape, or do they not gape, and even with open mouth fix their eyes fast on her? And have not all men more desire to her than to silver or gold, or any beautiful thing whatsoever? A man leaves his own father that brought him up, and his own country, and cleaves to his wife. He sticks not to spend his life or existence with his wife, and remembers neither father, nor mother, nor country. By this also you must know that women have dominion over you. Do you not labor and toil, and give and bring all to the woman? Yes, a man takes his sword and goes his way to rob and to steal, to sell upon the sea and upon rivers, and looks upon a lion, and goes in the darkness. And when he has stolen, spoiled, and robbed, he brings it to his love. Wherefore, a man loves his wife better than father or mother. Yes, many there be that have run out of their wits for women, and become servants for their sakes. Many also have perished, have erred, and sinned for women. And now do you not believe me? Is not the great sovereign in his power? Do not all regions fear to touch him? Yet did I see him and Apame, the sovereign's concubine, the daughter of the admirable Barticus, sitting at the right hand of the sovereign, and taking the crown from the sovereign's head and setting it upon her own head. She also struck the sovereign with her left hand, which in the Middle East, that's an insult if you weren't familiar. And yet, for all this, the sovereign gaped and gazed upon her with open mouth. If she laughed upon him, he laughed also. But if she took any displeasure at him, the sovereign was fain to flatter, that she might be reconciled to him again. O you men, how can it be but women should be strong, seeing they do thus? Then the sovereign and the princes looked one upon another. So he began to speak of the truth. O you men, are not women strong? Great is the Eretz, high is the Shemaim, swift is the sun in his course, for he compasses the Shemaim round about, and fetches his course again to his own place in one yom. Is he? There's another witness for the fact that it is the sun moving in a course over, encompassing the circuit of the Shemaim, and it's not the earth spinning, which is immovable, Scripture says. But moving on. Is he not great that makes these things? Therefore, great is the truth, and stronger than all things. All the Eretz cries upon the truth, and the Shemaim Baruch it, or Barak it. All works shake and tremble at it, and with it is no unrighteous thing. Wine is wicked, the sovereign is wicked, women are wicked, all the children of men are wicked, and such are all their wicked works, and there is no truth in them. In their unrighteousness also they shall perish. As for the truth, it endures and is always strong. It exists and conquers forevermore. With her, there is no accepting of persons or rewards. And here we go. Quite often, sometimes you'll see truth, which is our Mashiach, given the appellation of a her, which is in representation of the Ruach that's given from his mouth. So it's the same thing that Irenaeus, he separates when he says the Mashiach is the only begotten of the Father, and his Chokmah is the Ruach, which Chokmah proceeds from the mouth of his word, which is our Mashiach. All right, so it says, with her there is no accepting of persons or rewards, but she does the things that are righteous and refrains from all unrighteous and wicked things. And all men do well like of her works. Neither in her arbitration is any unrighteousness, and she is the strength, Malkuth or reign, power, and majesty of all ages. Baruch be Yahuwah of truth. And with that he held his shalom. And all the people then shouted and said, great is truth and mighty above all things. Then said the sovereign to him, ask what you will more than is appointed in the writing, and we will give it to you, or we will give it you, because you are found the most prudent. And you shall sit next to me, and shall be called my cousin. Then said he to the sovereign, remember your vow which you have vowed to build Jerusalem in the Yom when you came to your Malkuth or reign, and to send away all the vessels that were taken away out of Jerusalem, which Cyrus set apart when he vowed to destroy Babylon, and to send them again there. You also have vowed to build up the tabernacle, which the Edomites burned when Yehuda was made desolate by the Kasdim. So when Yehuda was made desolate by those that are like demons, it was Edomites, or the brothers that betrayed the promise to their father and mother, that hated their brother in their heart, that burned the place. And that is reminiscent, and that's why in the book of Gad the seer, it says that Edom is the Kittim, or Rome, that's in the north of the sea, which is the Mediterranean, because they were both, Rome and the other assemblies throughout the world, were both birthed of the renewed covenant, as they call. And this is all a picture, just to back up real quick. There's allusions to these things in Scripture when Shaul is speaking, and he says that Hagar is the first covenant in Sinai, which is in Arabia. He's establishing that Yishmael was like the Yahudim and the people in the land at that time without the Ruach, those who heard, but they weren't walking exactly correctly. And then it was of Yitzhak, the one born on the 15th of the third month, the promised seed that dwelt in the land in which was no unrighteousness, that was a offering to our Maker. All of these things play the picture there. That was the culminated in the giving of the renewed covenant, the birth of his body, the 15th of the third month. And when that happened, two were in the womb, just like it was two born of Rebecca. It was Edom and Yaakov. In the same way, you had the assemblies built up, and it eventually became Rome and the true believers. So that's a picture that, Father willing, everyone will be able to see. And that's the same thing I was talking about, how these things that play out have a larger implication. I don't begin to know all of that. I'm just showing you what I have seen and the things that were made clear to me. But continuing here, verse 46, it says, and now, and now, O Master the Sovereign, this is that which I require and which I desire of you, and this is the princely liberty proceeding from yourself. I desire, therefore, that you make Tob the vow, the performance whereof with your own mouth you have vowed to the sovereign of Shamayim. Then Darius the sovereign stood up and kissed him, and wrote letters for him to all the treasurers and lieutenants and captains and governors, that they should safely convey on their way both him and all those that go up with him to build Jerusalem. He wrote letters also to the lieutenants that were in Syria and Phoenicia, and to them in Libanus or Lebanon, that they should bring cedar wood from Lebanon to Jerusalem, and that they should build the city with him. The cedars of Lebanon were used in the building of both the sovereign's palace, the palaces, and the Hikel, and it was overlaid with gold and other things as well. But the cedars in Lebanon represents those that are of the council of his community. It mentions that the righteous are like the cedars in Lebanon in Psalm 33, I believe it is. And it mentions in the Peshar, or the commentary as it's translated in the modern English, the commentary for Nahum, I believe it is, where the Zadok Kohanim were breaking down verse by verse the explanation of what the foretellings were speaking of. It says that the council of his community are like the cedars. So when he's building that, he's building it with those that had prudent counsel, setting up the walls and the foundations that hedge in the building of his body. These are all pictures to teach us those things. It's also reminiscent of the ones that were endowed with Chokmah and Binah, or what they call wisdom and comprehension, in the wilderness that built the tabernacle. Same picture. And the elders, or the ministers that were chosen to help with Moshe because they were endowed with the ability to do so. All right. But to continue, it said that they should bring cedar wood from Lebanon to Jerusalem, and that they should build the city with him. Moreover, he wrote for all the Yahudim that went out of his realm up into Yahudah concerning their freedom or liberty, that no officer, no ruler, no lieutenant, nor treasurer should forcibly enter into their doors, and that all the country which they hold should be free without tribute, and that the Edomites should give over the villages of the Yahudim which then they held. Yes, that there should be yearly given 20 talents to the building of the temple or tabernacle until the time that it were built, and other 10 talents yearly to maintain the burnt offerings upon the altar every yom. as they had a commandment to offer 17, and that all that they went from Babylon to build the city should have free liberty. I apologize. As well they as their posterity and all the Kohanim that went away. He wrote also concerning the charges and the Kohanim's vestments wherein they minister, and likewise for the charges of the Leviim, to be given them until the yom that the house were finished, and Jerusalem built up. And he commanded to give to all that kept the city pensions and wages, and sent away also all the vessels from Babylon that Cyrus had set apart, and all that Cyrus had given in commandment, the same charged he also to be done, and sent to Jerusalem. Now when this young man was gone forth, he lifted up his face to the Shemaim toward Jerusalem, and praised Yahuwah the sovereign of Shemaim, and said, From you comes victory, from you comes chokmah, from yours is the honor, and yours is the honor, and I am your servant. Baruch are you, who has given me chokmah, for to you I give thanks, O Yahuwah of our fathers. And if you remember, it mentions that Zerubbabel would be made like a signet ring in the hand of Yahuwah. And it was with him that he was going to establish the foundation. That was the part there. I believe that was the beginning of the foretelling for the time of keeping track for the countdown of when our Mashiach was to return, was when they laid the foundation there, and the commandment was given for such. All right, and so he took the letters and went out and came to Babylon and told it all his brethren. And they praised Yahuwah of their fathers, because he had given them freedom and liberty to go up and to build Jerusalem and the great tabernacle which is called by his name. And they feasted with instruments of music and gladness 7 yamim. And that's probably a great spot to stop for this reading. If you happen to have any questions or comments that you want to make, I'll go ahead and keep it running, and then we can have that recorded as well. But if not, we'll stop and wrap things up. This did cover quite a bit of time. A lot of it was a recap to get to the part where they want to talk about. And they actually do the same thing in like the book of Maccabees, and also in Josephus when he's writing about the war of the Yahudim. He starts with the time of the Maccabees and then goes on into his current times when really that was a few hundred years worth of history that didn't have to be covered. But right here, they're just trying to recap to give you the sense of why or what happened to lead up to the events that were taking place. Was there any comments or questions? I see there's some stuff in the chat there. Okay. All right.
I was just making comments as I was going along.
I see that. All right. Well, if there's no comments or questions about what we read or anything that we said, we can go ahead and stop for the recording. All right. So everyone have a wonderful Shabbat, and we will see you next week. Thank you for spending time with us, and we hope that this was, or we pray that this was fruitful for you as well as for ourselves.